Welcome to my channel Scariest Stories. Have you ever wondered what happens to towns when they vanish beneath water, forgotten by time? Standing at the edge of Kentucky's lakes, I felt a shiver run down my spine. Places that once echoed with laughter, children running, and miners returning home now lie silent, swallowed by the depths. It's haunting to think that entire communities, their stories, their lives, are hidden forever underwater. Today, I want to take you into these ghost towns, where memories refuse to fade. If you love exploring forgotten places and real ghost stories, make sure to hit that subscribe button and join our journey. 1 Blue Heron, Harlan County, Kentucky. I remember the first time I set foot in Blue Heron. It was early spring, the kind of morning where mist lingers over the hills and the air smells like damp earth and pine. Driving through the winding roads of Harlan County, I had to remind myself that this place was once alive, buzzing with miners and their families, their laughter echoing across the valley. Now, the silence was almost deafening. Walking through the abandoned streets, I felt the weight of history pressing down on me. The houses, mostly wooden and weather-worn, leaned slightly, as if trying to hold on to the memories of the people who once called them home. Some doors were hanging loosely on their hinges, and windows, shattered or missing, revealed empty rooms where children once played. I could almost imagine the scent of coal dust mixed with the aroma of fresh bread from small kitchens, a memory that only existed in the echoes of time. The town was small, built entirely for the coal miners who worked the nearby mines. Blue Heron had a post office, a few general stores, and a church that stood proudly at the center. As I approached the church, I could feel the energy of a community that once came together every Sunday, families dressed in their best clothes, greeting each other with warm smiles. Today, the steeple still stood, but the doors were closed, and the wind whistled through the broken windows like a lonely hymn. I wandered down to the edge of the old mining area, where the remnants of tracks and equipment told stories of hard work and sacrifice. Every beam of sunlight cutting through the trees seemed to spotlight the lives that had vanished, leaving behind only memories carved into the land. Sitting on a fallen log, I closed my eyes and tried to picture a miner returning home after a long day, children running toward him, the smell of coal on his clothes, and the quiet joy of a family meal waiting. It struck me how fragile life was here. The town had thrived for decades, yet now, nature was slowly reclaiming it. Moss grew over the foundations, trees sprouted through forgotten yards, and the river nearby whispered the passage of time. Standing there, I felt a mix of sadness and awe, sadness for what was lost, and awe at the resilience of memories that lingered in the very air of Blue Heron. Leaving Blue Heron that day, I carried more than just photographs. I carried the feeling of having walked among ghosts who were not spectral but human, whose stories were etched into the hills and valleys of Kentucky. This wasn't just a town lost in space, it was a town living quietly in the hearts of anyone who paused to remember. 2 Bon Jellicoe, Harlan County, Kentucky. I arrived in Bon Jellicoe on a chilly autumn morning. The mist hung low over the hills, and the scent of damp soil filled the air. Driving along the narrow, winding roads, I couldn't help but imagine how lively this town must have been a century ago. Children's laughter, the rhythmic clanging of the coal mines, and neighbors greeting each other, it all seemed so vivid in my mind, even though now, silence ruled the streets. Walking through the remains of Bon Jellicoe, I noticed the old coal company houses, lined up in neat rows, but now battered by time and weather. The wooden planks of the porches creaked under my feet, as if whispering stories of families that once lived there. Some houses had broken windows, some had doors hanging loosely, and a few were completely collapsed, leaving only a roofless shell and the memories trapped inside. I paused by one of the old homes, closed my eyes, and imagined a miner coming back after a long, exhausting day, wiping soot from his face, his children running to hug him, and his wife calling them in for supper. The town had a small church and a general store at its center, the hub of community life. As I walked past them, I could almost hear the echoes of Sunday sermons and the murmur of neighbors exchanging news over groceries. Time had stolen their voices, but the buildings themselves seemed to hum with the energy of the past, quietly holding onto the lives that once filled them. I made my way toward the old mining area, where rusty tracks and broken carts told tales of hard labor and sacrifice. The hills around Bongelico were scarred by mining operations, yet nature was slowly reclaiming the land. Moss and weeds covered the old paths, and trees had grown in places where families once had gardens. Sitting on a fallen log, I let the stillness sink in, feeling both awe and sorrow. I could sense the determination and struggles of those who lived here, their lives bound to the mines, yet so fleeting in the grand scheme of time. Before leaving, I stood on a small hill overlooking the town. The morning mist was lifting, revealing the quiet valley below. Bongelico was gone in terms of everyday life, but not gone from memory. Its essence lingered in the rusting iron, the crumbling wood, and the wind that whispered through the hollow streets. Walking away, I realized I wasn't just visiting a ghost town, I was stepping into the heart of a forgotten community, feeling its presence long after it had faded from maps. 3 Packard, Letcher County, Kentucky. I first heard about Packard from an old friend who grew up near Letcher County. He told me stories of a town that once hummed with life, built entirely for the coal miners who labored in the hills. When I finally arrived, the sight of the abandoned town took my breath away. The winding roads were cracked and overgrown, and the silence was profound, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves. Walking through Packard felt like stepping into another world. The wooden houses, small and weathered, lined the streets in neat rows, yet most had collapsed or were barely standing. Some porches sagged, some roofs had caved in, and windows were shattered, revealing empty rooms that once held families, laughter, and the quiet routines of daily life. I ran my fingers over the rough wood, imagining the hands of the miners and their children, the countless evenings spent together in those homes. Packard was more than just houses. It had a church and a small schoolhouse, the heartbeat of the community. As I stood outside the school, I could almost hear the sound of children's footsteps on the wooden floors and the echo of lessons being called out by teachers long gone. The church bell, long silent, must have once called families together every Sunday, a signal of hope, faith, and shared life. I wandered toward the old mining area, where tracks and abandoned equipment told stories of relentless work and determination. The hills were steep, marked by scars of coal mining, and nature had begun reclaiming the land. Moss covered the foundations of homes, wildflowers grew where gardens once existed, and the wind carried the quiet whispers of lives that had come and gone. Sitting on a fallen beam near the old tracks, I felt a strange connection with the people who had lived here. Their struggles, their dreams, and their fleeting joys seemed to linger in the air, almost tangible. Before leaving, I climbed a small hill that overlooked Packard. The sun was setting, casting a warm orange glow over the abandoned town. It was breathtaking, yet heartbreaking. Packard may have disappeared from maps and from daily life, but it was far from forgotten. Its spirit remained in the hills, in the rusted remnants of homes, and in the silent whispers that still echoed through the valley. Walking away, I realized that visiting Packard wasn't just about seeing a ghost town, it was about feeling the heartbeat of a community that time could never fully erase. For Bell's Mines, Hopkins County, Kentucky. I first stumbled upon Bell's Mines on a cloudy afternoon. The air was cool, heavy with the scent of wet earth and fallen leaves. Driving through the winding roads of Hopkins County, I felt a mix of curiosity and unease. This place was once alive with miners and their families, but now, it felt like the land itself had swallowed their voices, leaving only whispers in the wind. As I walked along the old streets, I noticed the wooden houses standing in various states of decay. Some had collapsed entirely, leaving piles of timber and memories behind, while others leaned precariously, stubbornly holding on to the past. Doors hung loosely on their hinges, and broken windows revealed empty rooms where families had once gathered, laughed, and lived their daily lives. I closed my eyes for a moment and imagined the scene, children running around the yards, women hanging laundry, and miners returning home, weary but proud of their hard work. Bell's Mines wasn't just a collection of homes, it had a small church and a general store at its heart. These buildings must have been the center of community life, where neighbors exchanged news, and families found comfort in shared routines. Standing outside the church, I could almost hear faint echoes of Sunday sermons and the gentle murmur of prayers that once filled the air. The wind now whistled through the broken windows like a quiet hymn, carrying fragments of the past. I wandered down to the old mining area, where rusted equipment and remnants of tracks told stories of labor, resilience, and sacrifice. The hills around Bell's Mines bore the marks of coal mining, yet nature was slowly reclaiming its territory. Moss and grass grew over old foundations, and trees sprouted through abandoned yards. Sitting on a fallen log, I let the silence sink in, feeling the weight of the lives that had shaped this town. There was sadness, yes, but also awe at the enduring spirit of those who had lived here, whose presence still seemed to linger in every corner. Before leaving, I climbed a small rise overlooking the town. The sky was overcast, and a soft drizzle began to fall, making the wooden structures glisten with moisture. Bell's Mines was gone in terms of daily life, but its memory remained vividly etched into the land. Walking away, I realized that visiting this town wasn't just about seeing abandoned buildings, it was about connecting with a community long gone but never truly forgotten. The ghosts of Bell's Mines were not spectral but human, and their story lived on in every weathered beam and silent street. 5 Cumberland Falls Mining Camps, Kentucky. I first reached the Cumberland Falls mining camps on a crisp morning, when the mist from the nearby falls hung low in the valley. The sound of rushing water was constant, almost like a heartbeat, and it mingled strangely with the silence of abandoned buildings. Walking along the narrow dirt paths, I felt as if I had stepped into another era, a place where life once thrived, yet now only memories lingered. The mining camps were small, built to house workers who toiled in the coal mines nearby. Wooden cabins lined the paths, many leaning and weather-beaten, some reduced to mere foundations. The smell of damp wood and earth filled the air, and the wind whistled through the broken windows, carrying faint echoes of conversations from decades past. I imagined miners returning home after long, grueling shifts, children running to greet them, and the smell of home-cooked meals drifting from tiny kitchens. At the center of the camp stood a modest church and a communal hall. Though the doors were closed and paint peeled away, I could sense the life that once animated these spaces. Families gathered here, sharing stories, celebrating small joys, and supporting one another through hardships. Sitting on the steps of the hall, I tried to picture Sunday afternoons filled with laughter and chatter, a fleeting warmth now replaced by the cold embrace of abandonment. I wandered down to the riverbank, where some of the original structures were now submerged due to the lake's creation. The water's surface was calm, yet it concealed the remnants of lives once lived. Rusted tools and foundations peeked above the shallow areas, hinting at a history swallowed quietly by nature. As I walked along the edge, I felt a deep sadness mingled with reverence. These were people who had poured their hearts into the land, whose daily lives were now hidden beneath the water's gentle waves. Climbing a small hill overlooking the valley, I took a deep breath and let the scenery sink in. The falls roared in the distance, the mist wrapping the camps in an ethereal veil. Cumberland Falls mining camps may no longer exist as a bustling settlement, but its essence remained alive in the landscape, in the echoes of work and laughter, and in the quiet stories of those who once called it home. Walking away, I felt privileged to have witnessed a place where history, human spirit, and nature intertwined, leaving behind a hauntingly beautiful memory of life beneath the water and time. 6 Himmlerville, Martin County, Kentucky. I arrived in Himmlerville on a quiet summer morning. The sun was just rising over the hills of Martin County, casting long shadows across the empty streets. The town, once full of life and laughter, now stood silent, its wooden houses weathered and leaning with age. Walking through the narrow lanes, I felt a strange mix of curiosity and melancholy, as if the town itself was holding its breath, waiting to tell its story. Himmlerville had been a small mining town, built to house the workers who dug coal from the surrounding hills. The houses, simple and modest, were lined up in neat rows, though many had collapsed or were overgrown with grass and weeds. Some doors hung loosely on their hinges, and broken windows revealed empty rooms that once held families, meals, and the everyday sounds of life. I paused at one of the houses and imagined a miner returning home, tired but proud, children running to greet him, and the comforting smell of home-cooked food filling the air. The town had a small church and a community center, which had once been the heart of social life. Families gathered here to share news, celebrate milestones, and support each other through hardships. Standing outside the church, I could almost hear the echoes of hymns and prayers that once filled the space, mingling with the laughter of children and the murmur of neighbors. The buildings were now empty, but they seemed to hum faintly with memories, like whispers from the past. I walked toward the old mining area, where remnants of tracks, equipment, and rusted tools told the story of hard labor and sacrifice. The hills surrounding Himmlerville bore the marks of coal mining, yet nature was slowly reclaiming the land. Trees and wildflowers grew where gardens and paths once existed, and moss crept over the foundations of houses. Sitting on a fallen beam near the mines, I let the quiet sink in, feeling a connection to the people who had lived and worked here, their hopes and struggles lingering in the air like a ghostly presence. Before leaving, I climbed a small rise that overlooked the town. The morning sun was bright now, illuminating the abandoned streets and the surrounding hills. Himmlerville may have vanished from maps and daily life, but it remained alive in the memory of its land, in the echoes of laughter and work, and in the quiet resilience of those who once called it home. Walking away, I realized that visiting Himmlerville wasn't just about seeing a ghost town, it was about feeling the heartbeat of a community that time could never fully erase. 7 Barthel, Harlan County, Kentucky. I first arrived in Barthel on a crisp autumn morning. The hills of Harlan County were painted with shades of orange and gold, and the cool breeze carried the faint scent of damp leaves. Driving into the town, I immediately noticed how quiet it was. The streets, once bustling with miners and their families, were now empty, lined with wooden houses that had weathered countless seasons. Walking through Barthel, I felt like I had stepped back in time. The houses, small and simple, showed the marks of age and abandonment. Some had roofs caved in, others had doors hanging loosely, and windows were shattered, revealing empty rooms that once held families and their daily lives. I paused in front of one house and imagined a miner returning from a long day in the mines, soot on his clothes, children running to greet him, and the smell of a warm dinner waiting inside. Barthel had a small church and a community hall, the heart of social life for its residents. I could almost hear the faint echoes of hymns from the church and the murmur of neighbors exchanging news in the hall. Families must have celebrated birthdays, marriages, and even small joys here, but now, only silence remained. The wind whistled through broken windows, carrying with it fragments of the town's forgotten stories. I wandered toward the old mining area, where tracks, carts, and equipment lay rusting, half swallowed by nature. The hills were scarred from years of coal mining, yet they also held a strange beauty. Trees had grown through abandoned yards, and moss covered the foundations of homes. Sitting on a fallen log near the old tracks, I could almost feel the energy of the people who had lived here, their struggles, their dreams, and the fleeting happiness that once filled this place. Before leaving Barthel, I climbed a small hill overlooking the town. The view was breathtaking, the valley stretched out before me, dotted with the remnants of houses and the winding paths of the mines. Barthel may no longer exist as a lively town, but it lived on in its memories, etched into the landscape and the stories carried by the wind. Walking away, I felt a profound respect for the community that had called this place home, and I realized that even abandoned towns like Barthel still hold the heartbeat of human life within their silent streets. 8 Eolia, Pike County, Kentucky. I first arrived in Eolia on a misty morning, the kind where the fog drifts lazily over the hills and everything feels hushed. The town, once bustling with coal miners and their families, now seemed frozen in time. Driving through the winding roads of Pike County, I felt a mix of awe and sadness. Every step I took echoed through the empty streets, a reminder that this place had a story waiting to be heard. Walking through Eolia, I noticed the old wooden houses, small and modest, leaning slightly as if holding on to the memories of those who had lived there. Some houses were completely collapsed, leaving only piles of timber and the faint traces of former lives. Doors hung loosely, and shattered windows revealed empty rooms where children once played and families shared meals. I paused for a moment, imagining a miner coming home after a long day, soot on his clothes, greeted by his children's laughter and the comforting smell of dinner waiting on the table. The town had a small church and a general store that had once been the heart of community life. Though abandoned now, I could almost hear the echoes of Sunday sermons and neighbors exchanging news, their voices mingling with the gentle rustle of leaves. Standing outside the church, I felt the spirit of the town, its joy, its struggles, and its sense of togetherness, still lingering, even after decades of silence. I made my way toward the old mining site, where rusted equipment and broken tracks told stories of hard labor and perseverance. The hills surrounding Eolia bore the scars of coal mining, yet nature was slowly reclaiming the land. Moss grew over foundations, wildflowers bloomed where gardens once stood, and trees sprouted through the empty yards. Sitting on a fallen beam, I let the quiet settle in, imagining the lives of the people who had walked these streets, their dreams, their hardships, and their fleeting moments of happiness. Before leaving, I climbed a small hill overlooking the town. The morning fog had lifted, revealing the silent valley below. Eolia may no longer exist as a living town, but its essence remained alive in the landscape and in the memories carried by the wind. Walking away, I felt privileged to have experienced a place where history, human resilience, and the passage of time intertwined. Eolia was not just a ghost town, it was a testament to the lives and stories of those who once called it home. 9 Eerie, Muhlenberg County, Kentucky. I arrived in Eerie on a chilly morning, with the mist clinging to the hills and the early sunlight barely breaking through. The town, once alive with coal miners and their families, now lay in silence. Driving along the winding roads of Muhlenberg County, I felt a strange mix of curiosity and melancholy, as if stepping into a place that remembered every laugh, every struggle, and every story of those who had lived here. Walking through Eerie, I noticed the small wooden houses, many leaning or partially collapsed. Some had doors hanging from their hinges, and windows were broken, revealing empty rooms that once held families, meals, and daily life. I paused near one house, imagining a miner returning home after a long shift, soot on his clothes, greeted by children's laughter and the comforting smell of dinner waiting in the kitchen. Each house felt like a vessel of memories, quietly holding the lives of people long gone. The town had a small church and a general store at its center, which had once been the heart of the community. Though now abandoned, I could almost hear the echoes of Sunday sermons, the murmur of neighbors exchanging news, and the laughter of children playing outside. The wind whistling through broken windows seemed to carry faint fragments of these moments, reminding me that life had once thrived here. I wandered toward the old mining area, where tracks, carts, and abandoned equipment hinted at the hardships and dedication of the miners. The hills around Eerie bore the marks of coal mining, yet nature was slowly reclaiming the land. Trees and wildflowers grew over old foundations, and moss covered forgotten paths. Sitting on a fallen beam near the mining site, I tried to picture the daily routines of those who had lived here, their struggles, small joys, and fleeting moments of happiness. Before leaving, I climbed a small hill overlooking the town. The valley stretched out below, quiet and still, the remnants of Eerie scattered among the trees. The town may no longer exist in its former glory, but its spirit remained alive in the landscape and in the stories carried by the wind. Walking away, I felt a profound connection with the people who had called Eerie home, and I realized that even abandoned towns like this hold a heartbeat that time cannot erase. 10 Partridge Coal Camps, Letcher County, Kentucky. I first arrived at Partridge Coal Camps on a crisp morning, the kind where the air smells of damp earth and pine. The winding roads of Letcher County led me into a valley that seemed frozen in time. The town, once filled with coal miners and their families, now lay silent, its wooden houses weathered and leaning with age. Walking through the streets, I could almost hear the echoes of a life that had once thrived here, laughter, chatter, and the distant sound of the mines at work. The houses were small, simple, and mostly abandoned. Some had collapsed completely, leaving only timber and rubble, while others stood stubbornly, holding on to the stories of those who once lived within. Doors hung loosely on their hinges, and broken windows revealed empty rooms that had once been homes filled with warmth and life. I paused in front of a house and imagined a miner returning from a long day in the mines, soot covering his clothes, greeted by children running into his arms, while the smell of fresh bread and dinner filled the air. At the center of the camp stood a small church and a communal hall, which must have been the heart of social life. Families gathered here for Sunday services, celebrations, and shared moments of joy or sorrow. Though the buildings were now silent, I could almost hear faint echoes of laughter and conversation, mingling with the wind that whispered through the broken windows. It felt as though the town itself was trying to tell me its story, piece by piece. I wandered down to the old mining area, where rusted tracks and abandoned equipment spoke of relentless labor and the dedication of the miners. The hills around Partridge coal camps bore the marks of coal extraction, yet nature was slowly reclaiming its territory. Moss and grass covered old foundations, wildflowers bloomed where gardens had once stood, and trees sprouted through forgotten yards. Sitting on a fallen log near the tracks, I let the silence envelop me, imagining the lives that had been lived here, the struggles, the dreams, and the fleeting joys that time could never fully erase. Before leaving, I climbed a small hill overlooking the valley. The sun was beginning to set, casting a golden glow over the abandoned town. Partridge coal camps may no longer exist as a living community, but its spirit remained, etched into the land and carried in the whispers of the wind. Walking away, I felt as if I had stepped into the heart of a forgotten world, where the ghosts were not spirits but memories of real people who had lived, worked, and loved here, leaving behind a town that time could never truly erase.